Good morning. We are in a sermon series. If you haven't been here in a couple of weeks, or if this is your first week or you're visiting, welcome. We're going through a sermon series about calling, and we're trying to answer the question, what would God have me to do? What is God's will for my life? And my contention to that has been that God calls us in many different ways, many different places. Some of those callings we share with each other. Some of them are unique. Some of them are lifelong. Some of them are momentary. They're wide and varied. And so we had kind of this graphic that I've used, that I developed, that I've sort of shared. And if you remember last week we looked at a universal calling, God, the calling that God puts on all people's lives, the God that we might know Him, we might be saved, or all kinds of language He used for that. And next week, actually, we're going to be going through looking at careers as a calling. And my dear friend Caleb Henry from Northern California is going to be here visiting with us, and he's going to be preaching, actually. He'll be in the pulpit sharing about that kind of calling. And actually, as well, something you should be aware of, next Sabbath, the 24th, we're going to have a special prayer of blessing and dedication for our teachers. So if you're a teacher, be sure to be here as we pray over and celebrate you and your work. But this week, we're kind of in between, right? We're kind of in between those last, what we did last week and what we're doing next week. If we go one more slide, one more, there's Caleb, they're right here. Here we go. So this is kind of where we're at. We're going to look at a different sort of calling. And to kind of illustrate a little bit what the stakes are, I want to tell three super, super short vignettes from my life from when I was very early on in my pastoral ministry, all right? So super, super quick. Here's a picture from that era. Paige looks a lot better than I do. So this is from those first year or so as I was a pastor. I remember I was out with an evangelist, and we were visiting people's homes, and we were giving Bible studies and praying with people and so on. And I spent a couple of weeks with this guy, and at the end I asked him a question. I said, hey, could you give me some advice? Can you tell me something that you wished that someone had told you when you were my age? And give me some wisdom. You know, he was I think in his 70s at the time, and here I was 22 or something. And so I was serious. You know, I really wanted to hear what his wisdom. And he said, don't put your trash in front of the house. And I was like, that's deep, man. That's deep. And he was like, yeah, so don't put your trash. And then he went on to describe. He went on and said, yeah, so one time I was out at this church, and we left our trash bag outside the camper, and someone went through the trash from the church, and they were digging through it, and they found this empty thing of ice cream, and then we had to have this whole conversation with the board, and there was this big inquisition. Yeah, so don't leave your trash outside your house. That's my advice. It's like, okay. All right, I'm like 6 months into this career. So another one. I worked with a church leader early on, and there's this woman who wanted to be baptized. She'd gone through this conversion experience, amazing experience. Her whole life had changed, and she had spent the whole first part of her life as someone who smoked. She smoked cigarettes. And she had gone through like this, stop smoking program, and was like working so hard at it. But like, the date of the baptism came, and she hadn't quite been able to kick the habit yet. And this leader that I was working with said, no, you're not getting baptized. He would not baptize this woman because she hadn't yet completely got over this addiction for smoking. And I remember just being completely dismayed. Again, within my first year in ministry, this happened. I'd never heard of such a thing. And some of you, maybe, I see a few heads nodding. Some of you have heard of such a thing, but it was just blew me away. At the third vignette, really quick, I was on a mission trip. It was in another country, another continent, and I was working with a pastor, and we were working with his church, and I was doing like some preaching and stuff, whatever. And somehow we got onto the conversation about ritually unclean foods, right? We were, talking about this today. And I kind of made an offhanded comment that like, I think that there are a lot more important things than whether or not someone eats bacon. and he just lost his mind. It was like I suggested the way he reacted was like I had suggested that we should, burn the church down or something. He just freaked out and he started throwing accusations at me and told me I wasn't an Adventist and I wasn't a pastor and I had no business being there to help him. Again, first year of pastoral ministry, this happened. So I had all these experiences, and I was thinking to myself, what did I get myself into? What is this career that I have signed myself up for? And listen, I'm not demonizing any of these people. Several of these people are good friends, and I love them. But I think that some of these, behaviors, some of these comments, some of their judgments or whatever, it revealed to me something about this sort of, religious culture that I was getting into, and the place where it left me, and this is where I'm getting to. The place where it left me as a pastor, brand new in this career, it left me in a place of unsteadiness and fear and anxiety. What if the ice cream police come toward me, what if they come to my house? What am I going to do when this questioning comes my way? What am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my position? And so I went through this period, a few years there, where I was hiding and I was pretending and I wouldn't say what I actually thought. And I was very, very careful about what I did and who I said what to. We're just very, very tight and closed. Are you following me? So looking back on that experience, one of the ways that I make sense of it, one of the ways that I explain it, is that I think at that time, I had defined my own sense of calling as being one and the same as my career. So I saw my personal mission in life is to be a pastor, to have the vocation of pastoral ministry. And so to be in a situation where I felt like maybe that could be at risk, or if I, like the ice cream thing, if I, eat ice cream, I could lose my calling. For me, that felt like an existential threat, right? I felt very, very afraid. I felt like my whole life was up in the air. It was terrifying. And later in life, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years into my pastoral ministry, I did some personal work, and I did some self-discovery, and for me, I came to separate those two things. I came to separate my personal sense of mission, of what God created me to do in the world, and my career and calling, which also I think is a type of calling, and that's the one we're going to talk about next week. But I came to separate those two, that I have a sense of calling over my life, and I have vocation. And doing this work for me gave me a huge amount of confidence, because I came to believe that I can be the person that God created me to be in this world. I can live the life that God created me to live. I can live out God's calling in my life, even if this vocation is for some reason is taken away, or some, whatever, supervisor or career or organization. Nobody can take that from me, what God created me to do. Are you with me? And so even if there were no churches, even if there were no conferences, even if there were no buildings, even if I was, a janitor, or I did some other career, or I was, worked in picking tomatoes or whatever, I could still fulfill my calling in life. That's where I've come to believe today. And I can't tell you how much peace that distinction has brought me. And so here's where we are for today. I believe, my contention is that every single one of us has a calling that is deep and abiding and carries through, and it transcends circumstance. It transcends situation. It's beyond whether or not we're successful, or what job we're in, or who we married to, or where we live. And there's all kinds of names that we give this. I think, in American culture, some of us call it purpose, some of us call it personal mission, or the meaning that I have in life, or personal axioms, or value systems, or worldviews. We give it all kinds of labels. And honestly, I don't think that many of us need to be convinced that this is a thing, that God made us a certain way. And I'm not even going to argue. I'm just going to assert it because I think that it's true. And even, in broader American culture, we know it. You could watch essentially any Disney movie, and you would see a story about someone who discovered what they were made to do, whether you were a mouse that knew how to cook or whatever. So I think the operative question for us this morning is, how do we figure that out? How do we sort that out? How do we identify it? How do we get confident in it? How do we get clear about what God created me to do and to be in this world? And honestly, even this, I think we already have some intuition of how it works. We know that our sense of mission is fueled by our past experiences. It's informed by our family systems and our personalities and our gifting and our interests and our curiosity. I mean, the things that we're passionate about are clues. You know, if we, just those of us that are sitting in this room, we're excited about all sorts of fun, interesting things. I think of Brian Watkins, who loves octopi. I think of Debbie and Tim, who love farming and hospitality. And I think of Corbin, the Ross Pencer, who loves sleight of hand. And I think of Bree, who is passionate about geology and rocks and science. And I think about Sean, who is here, who loves to get stuff done and loves to fix stuff. And there's some of us who have passions that are strange, too, and we still love them. Some of us are passionate, like David Wren, about the Chargers. I mean, there's these odd, very strange passions that are difficult to explain or to understand. The Chargers are one of those. But you know, we know how this works. We know how we figure out what we're passionate about in life. I mean, just next Sabbath will be an opportunity, actually, to do some of this work. You've been maybe seeing it in your bulletin on the screen. Pastor Todd is organizing a group where they're going to go through and work on, what am I gifted at? What am I passionate about? What has God called me to do in this world? And actually, it's going to be in the auditorium next Sabbath afternoon, inside from the heat. There'll be lunch. It will be well worth the few hours that you will spend doing that together. So if you have time, next Sabbath, 1 week from today, there's a sheet in the lobby you could sign up on, or you can send him an email or whatever. But he said, please RSVP, because you're going to have food ready for everyone. But that will be a good time. But today, I want to spend the majority of our time looking at just one pathway, all right? Just one pathway at discovering what is my calling in life. What is the mission that God called me to do that transcends circumstance, that's beyond my career, that's beyond the circumstances, beyond where I'm living? What did God create me to do in this world? We're going to look at just one pathway, and to get at it, I want to look at a line from the Presbyterian minister Frederick Buechner. He has some fantastic stuff. Really, really remarkable author and poet. He's 93 years old. He's still living. He lives in New York. Princeton-educated, brilliant guy. He's written novels. I love his stuff. My favorite book of his is called Telling Secrets, and it's a memoir. But this one is from a book called Wishful Thinking, a theological ABC. And he has this line that I used to have as my tag on an email. He says, neither the hair shirt or the soft berth will do. The place God calls you is to the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep need meet. So he kind of references. Buechner says, listen, you're not going to find your calling, God's the reason that God created us. You're not going to find it in looking for pleasure, the wide berth. And you're not going to find it in needlessly making yourself a martyr. That's the hair shirt. It's a form of penance, right? He says, first, look at your deep gladness. Look at the Chargers. That's fine. But then notice the second half of this sentence, and this is where we're going to stick for the rest of the sermon, where the world's deep need meet, where those two things meet. I think one of the ways that we can come to understand where and what the world's great needs are is to look for suffering, whether it's in our own lives or whether it's the lives of people around us. I think that the story of Esther from the scriptures, for example, is a case study of this dynamic, the world's great needs and where calling comes from. If you're unfamiliar with the story of Esther, that's no problem. I'm going to give a quick summary here, but just an advertisement for a moment. Esther's a short book. You could read it in probably in a 20-minute sitting. It's a quick read. So if you've not read it before, I encourage you, maybe this afternoon or something, pull out a Bible. It's in the Old Testament. Read the book of Esther. Read the story. You can blast through it super quick. But and if you don't, or as a supplement, check out, there's a VeggieTales episode all about Esther, and that would be another possible recommendation. You could do them both. It could be a companion volume. So, but here's the summary, all right? If you're unfamiliar, don't worry about it at all. Esther was a Jewish woman. She was a young Jewish woman, and she lived after the time of the Babylonian exile. So Babylon had come in, they had conquered the Jews, they had conquered Jerusalem, right? Sent people all over the place. So Esther lived in the time after that. So it's after the time of Daniel in the lion's den, after Meshach, Rashach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, right? It's after that. It's the time when Persia ruled over the Jewish people, right? And the story from the book of Esther goes that Queen Vashti, who is the wife of King Xerxes, the Persian king, right? She refuses his advances, and specifically, she refuses to parade herself like an object in front of his court, right? And we don't know from the text if she thought that was humiliating or if she thought his ego was ridiculous and she wasn't just going to do that. We don't really know what the reason is. Or maybe she was just a bad person. I kind of have my doubts about that. But she refused what he wanted her to do, and he behaves like a spoiled playground bully and kicks her out of his court, right? Divorces her, kicks her out of his house. He doesn't want anything to do with her. And he begins, again, like the blubbering playground bully, he begins a nationwide hunt for a new mate. So Esther, this is where she enters into the story. Esther is an orphan girl. Her parents have died, and she's in exile. She's Jewish. And she's among those chosen from the kingdom to parade themselves in front of him as potential wives. And Esther's beauty, this story goes, it wins Xerxes' attention, and Esther becomes queen. She becomes Queen Esther, right? Which is quite a turn, right? From orphaned, exiled person to queen of the kingdom. And before the story is over, Esther eventually uses this position of influence to foil a plan that was hatched within the Persian court to exterminate all of her fellow countrymen. She uses great cunning and leadership and tact and amazing skills to foil this plan. And the book of Esther in the scriptures, it's one of only two that don't specifically mention God. And it's one that's read every year by Jewish people as they celebrate the festival of Purim. And the book is frequently used to tell the truth, that God always sticks with his people, that even when things look dark, God will pull through. And generally, Esther, I think, is rightly interpreted as a well-deserving biblical hero, right? We celebrate her for her courage, for her creativity, for her ingenuity, for her leadership. She demonstrates amazing craftiness and skill. We celebrate her, rightly so. But today, I want to invite you to think about that story that we just told with a slightly different reading. I want us to think about it for a moment and ask if we might look at this story through the eyes of Me Too. You guys are familiar with Me Too. I mean, this conversation, national conversation we've been having about assault and how we treat one another and when we speak up and powers, right? This conversation about people that have and are continuing to be hurt in many different segments of our culture. So I want to look at this story. I want to go back and look at this story of Esther and kind of look at it through that lens. Think for a moment of what it might have been like to grow up as Esther, as that young woman. Your country you live in, America, right? It's been completely conquered by a foreign power and is being occupied. And all the people that you know or knew have been shipped off to all different corners of the known world, right? You've been exiled, scattered. Your cultural treasures have been looted. Your religious centers have been plundered. This is the situation with Esther, this person who's in this. Everything has been torn apart. And here is Esther. She's 14 years old. She's a child. She's 14 years old. She's an orphan. Her parents are dead. She's living alone in strange people in a strange country with strange and different traditions and speaking a different language. And now, all alone in this place, she's summoned by the king and pressured, I'm not giving him the benefit of the doubt right now, but pressured by her uncle, right, to go flaunt herself in front of the king and to eventually share his bedroom? She's a child. To me, this doesn't sound like a story of heroism. It doesn't sound like a beauty pageant, like we sometimes read it. It sounds like assault. It sounds like the abuse of power. It sounds traumatizing and awful on pretty much every level. I mean, can you imagine how scared she must have felt at 14? Can you imagine how powerless she must have felt? Some of you can imagine. Some of you can imagine. Some of you know what it feels like to be objectified like she was, or to have your humanity overlooked as your body is used for someone else's pleasure or control or ego. Esther was no doubt an amazing human being and an amazing woman who showed up in remarkable ways and showed an incredible knack for influencing agents of power, no doubt whatsoever. But before that, she was a little girl. She was a little girl who had been taken advantage of and who had been abandoned and who had been used. Before she was a queen, she was a victim of childhood abuse. And I think because of that reality, it makes the things that she accomplished a little bit later even more remarkable. Esther was a survivor. Esther had survived, had gone through a whole lot of suffering. Esther had touched the needs of the world, to borrow words from Frederick Buechner. She had touched those needs in her own life. And as one emerging from a fire, Esther changed the world that she lived in. She stepped out and became an agent of God in that place. For me, when I read her story, I can't help but read it and believe that Esther's calling comes from her identity. It comes from her story. And I can't help but read that it came in part from her stepping back and touching into that suffering that happened earlier in her life. She became the wise and influential and courageous woman that we rightly celebrate and look up to. She became that woman in part because she suffered. And in part because she healed from that just a little bit. And it's my opinion that had she not done some healing, had she not worked through some of that it's really hard for me to believe that she would not just crumble under the pressure. Because those of us who are still living in active trauma, when we get touched, it all goes out the window. But instead, this woman shows up with remarkable strength and dignity and power, especially despite her circumstances. And as a pastor, I've heard stories like this over and over and over and over again. A person goes through a terrible experience. They face an indescribable pain. And somehow, by the grace of God, by the power of the resurrected Jesus, by the presence of Spirit in their lives, they survive. And over and over again, I hear these stories. Some of them are your stories. I hear people's stories over and over again about how we've healed, and how we work through our pain, and as we name what has happened, as we forgive, as we release, as we draw new boundaries, as we begin to shape new values, as we begin to understand our new sense of calling, we begin to see why we're here on the planet, and we begin using that suffering as strength in our lives. For a lot of us who are in this room, we know why God made us, because we've touched into things that we've been hurt with along the way. We know the suffering, we know the needs of the world because we personally have felt and experienced them. And that pain fuels us to give back. Davy Menard has agreed to come and share with us just for a moment. If you don't know Davy, she's a well-loved member of our congregation. She spent a lot of her years in Northern California before she made her way down here to Southern California. Davy has family who's a part of this congregation, family who's very loved. Shelley Turner is her daughter. She has grandkids, Jed and Audrey. I think they're all still on vacation, yeah? They're enjoying themselves, yeah. So, but she's going to share a little bit with us, and I'm going to ask her some questions. So, Davy, a few weeks ago, you came into my office, and we had a great conversation. We got acquainted a little bit. Yes. And you came specifically, though, to tell me about a ministry idea that you had in mind. And at present, that ministry is actively taking off, and it's going to happen. And so I want you to tell us about it. It's called Grief Share. And I want you to tell us about that. What is Grief Share?
That sounds like a happy place to go, doesn't it? That's the way to start. Yes, I am Davy. I am the mom of Shelley Turner. I'm the grandma of Jed Turner, and I am proud of that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, to talk about God calling you, I was sitting over there thinking, okay, God, I know you're calling me. God, yes. Mm-hmm. This is your time. Why? Because I'm a widow. I've been there. I've done the work of grief. And I want to help this church. I am so excited about bringing Grief Share. You know, as Christians, Kristopher, it's just, we have such a message, such a hope. Resurrection, heaven, being together again. We have such hope that a lot of times we don't give ourselves permission to grieve. And you know, you've been to emergency rooms before. You go there because you're hurt. You go there because you have symptoms of something that's going on in your life. Well, the same thing happens with grief. At the beginning, I thought I was doing pretty good, Kristopher. I was doing great. I thought, oh, I can do this. I can do this. And I remember my first journey to the store, out the door by myself. And I got to the store. I went in and I was able to concentrate on getting all my things together. And I came out to the car, and the door was open, and my car was still running. Is it okay to forget things in grief? Yes. Is it okay to visit how you feel? Yes. Can anybody tell you what journey you're going through? No. No one can tell you that. They can't tell you how long you're going to grieve. But Grief Share is a program that will give you tools. It will give you tools and will help you go through. You talk about the shadow, you know, walking through the shadow of death. Mm-hmm. You know, Chris? Yeah. A lot of people try to go around it. I jumped right over it and thought that I was doing good until I came out to my car and forgot to close the door and turn my motor off. Mm-hmm. Then I knew I was in trouble, and that's when I found Grief Share. Mm-hmm.
So Grief Share, thank you. Grief Share it's a group?
It is a group. Together? It is a 13-week seminar. And the very first thing that you do is that you will come in and you will be greeted by wonderful, loving, caring facilitators. Lynette, who's not here today. Hi, Lynette. One of our things that we have is that if you can't come to church, you can watch what we're doing. Yeah. And I have facilitators that will be there to greet you because We have been through the journey, and we have gone through the other side. And there are three parts of it. There's a video where you will have grief counselors. And then we just weren't going to leave it there. We have a beautiful, beautiful workbook that we bring to you. You work with it with the videos, and we don't just leave you there and let you go home without anything. We're going to keep you going all week. And in the workbook, you have devotionals every day. You have the promises every day to get you through. And then the most important thing is coming together, because each one of you have a story. There's got to be people out there who are still hurting. And it doesn't make any difference if this just happened to you this week. It doesn't make any difference if it happened 5 years or 10 years. There are times when we get stuck in grief. We get stuck with maybe some anger. We talk about that. We get stuck because we got, a little bit of, oh, should I have done that? We get stuck. We talk about all those things.
Oh, that's good.
And it's just a wonderful thing. And so it's just, it helped me. And I was so excited about being able to bring it to you, because it's like an emergency room for grieving.
So if people want to get involved, I understand that there's a group of facilitators who are going to lead this ministry, and so that's a beautiful thing, members of this church and so on. I think you need a couple more. You're looking for kind of some male persuasion, especially facilitators.
I need some gentlemen, and I have 3 facilitators now, but they're all women, and I need a couple of gentlemen. Even if God is speaking to you, is there a couple out there that says, yes, I have gone through grief, I have been healed?
So what should people do if they want to be involved, or if they want to help, or whatever? You're going to be in the lobby.
I will be in the lobby.
Minutes.
So anybody who wants to come and talk to me, I'll be there.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing a little of your story, Davey. Let's give her a hand. I believe that God created you, and I believe that God created me with gifts and passion and with calling over our lives. And I believe that He is in the process of helping you find healing from the stuff that you've been through, from the suffering, or He's right on the way of bringing that into your life. And I think if you're working through your stuff right now, I think that if you stick with it, you'll find gold and beauty on the other side. I think what Frederick Buechner writes is deeply true, and I want to read it again. Neither the hair shirt nor the soft berth will do. The place God calls you is to the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep needs meet. I want to invite you to pray with me. I'm going to read a prayer today for our benediction that's from the Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann, and I think this will be the 3rd or the 4th sermon that I've closed with one of his prayers. And it's because I find them deeply moving, and I think they often capture the spirit of what God is trying to do through sermons, and today's is no exception. It's a prayer called In Human Form, so I want to invite you to pray with me as I read. You are God, high, lifted up, majestic. As we say, yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. You are high and lifted up. It dazzles us that your work, your will, through human agents, those whom you call and choose to empower, even the weak, the lowly, the nobodies. You are high and lifted up. It stuns us that you have worked your will through such human agents as David, the runt of his family, almost left behind and forgotten, and you called him to power and obedience and success. You are high and lifted up. It staggers us that you have worked your will through this Jesus of Nazareth, he of no pedigree, he of no form or comeliness, he who emptied himself in obedience, and you have raised him to new life, before whom every knee shall bow. You are high and lifted up. It astonishes us that you would work your will through human agents like us, people of little consequence and little capacity. You, O Jesus, you call us beyond ourselves. You send us beyond our imagination. You empower us beyond our capacity, and we become your agents in the world, day by day, doing justice and mercy and compassion. And at the end of the day, we will still say in astonishment that you were high and lifted up and majestic. We are your creatures, and we give our lives back to you, filled with gratitude, eager for the rest that only you can give. We pray these words in the name of Jesus. Amen.